with abusive fathers or in dysfunctional relationships where they repeat the patterns and they are attracted to the men who represent certain characteristics that their fathers showed. And it doesn't, it sort of doesn't make sense to you unless you have lived that yourself. And for me, those, there had to come a time where it had to crash, because I couldn't keep engaging in these risky sort of behaviours where I was going out drinking a lot, hanging out with guys who weren't, good for me to be around. And eventually, it did end where I was sexually assaulted by a guy who I had been friends with and on some dates with, and we had been in each other's lives for 18 months, and he had spent all of that time grooming me. And there were a lot of red flags along the way, but of course I didn't see them. I had friends, I had my mum trying to warn me, and all I could say was, you don't understand him the way I do. He's had a hard life, and I've just got to wait a bit longer till he sorts himself out, or I can help him. I just wanted to fix him, and I wanted to help him. And it is a really huge issue that we see with so many young people today, male and female, where they just want to help the person who is the abusive person. And after that assault, I know that was really my rock bottom moment, and I really had to make a decision whether I was going to continue the patterns that I had been following for, several years, or if I was going to do something to change and reroute my life. And I still didn't know, exactly how to get myself out of that rut, but I knew that if I did some small things like not going out, all the time and drinking as much, or not going out with people that hadn't, shown me that I could rely on them or trust them. And I started to try and stop hanging around guys who were sort of showing me the same sort of patterns that I'd seen in other men in the past. And in many ways, I was very blessed that a really beautiful young man walked into my life only a few months after that assault. And we had gone to school together, and my family knew his family. And I was still really scared of him when he, asked if we could go on dates. I remember, I remember being at work and having a man walk up to me at my desk in my workplace, and I was working in Big W, and this guy just came up, to buy something, and he must have seen the look on my face, because I think I backed away from him, and I was so timid and so frightened, and he said, "Are you okay? Is something wrong?" And that was the level of trauma that I was dealing with when I met this guy who was, to become my future boyfriend. I was still so scared, and I didn't know how to trust anyone. And there were times he would say to me, why are you pushing me away? Why? I'm not going to hurt you. And I said, I know you're telling me that, but that's also what this other person spent 18 months telling me, that they would never hurt me. So how do I know that you're not, I'm sorry, but how do I know that I can trust you? And so for me, I really had to take this stance and try to have a little bit more courage and bravery to ask for what I deserved, even though at that time I still didn't believe that I was really a valuable human being. I still didn't have very much self-esteem or self-worth, but I was kind of just following that, fake it till you make it thing. So I would look for him to prove that I could trust him instead of just taking it at face value. So if he said he was going to be somewhere, he would be there. If I told him that a particular word that he used reminded me of the way my dad spoke to me, he would never use that word again, even if it was just a joke. He really took it on board and showed me over time that I could trust him every day, and that he was going to be there when he said he would, and that he cared for me. And I think that was a big part of my healing process, and I was very, very lucky to meet him when I did. But I had already started in motion some of those things, as I said, with not following some of the same patterns, or distancing myself from certain people who had been leading me into these unhealthy kind of environments. And that relationship really did help me hit the reset button in my life, and I did, sort of begin to love life again. But by the same token, I still wasn't really thriving. I still didn't believe that I could do anything in the future that would be worthwhile, or anything that could really make a difference in the world. I thought, oh, I'll probably just work in a retail job or something like that, you know. And there's nothing wrong with people working in retail if that's, you know, where they love working. But for me, I knew those things weren't fulfilling me. I'd always been a really creative person, and I loved photography, and I loved, you know, exploring music and creating things. But by the same token, I just didn't believe I would ever achieve any of those things. And all of the self-limiting mindsets that I had from my childhood, with my dad telling me things like, you know, you'll never amount to anything, you're stupid, it's no wonder this didn't work out for you. All these kind of things were still stuck in my mind, so I didn't know how to make goals. I didn't know how to set plans for my life, really, and I definitely didn't believe that any passions or dreams that I had could come true. So when I share my story with people, I say, you know, the healing journey after trauma is such a long journey, and it's an everyday thing as well. We don't just suddenly wake up one day and everything's perfect. And if we do wake up one day and things are better, they don't stay that way unless you work every day on your mental health, and you make sure you have good people in your life, and you make sure you're taking care of your body and your mind. You know, our mental health is something that is an everyday thing, just like our physical health. And for me, it actually took me 10 years to come to terms with what I had experienced when I was 20 with that sexual assault. It wasn't until a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I was at that stage living in Brisbane. I had been married for a year or two at that stage to my husband, and I was doing a lot of advocacy around domestic violence, and I still had it in my mind that I had never experienced domestic violence. I knew that I'd experienced family violence, but when I would talk to women who had come out of abusive relationships, I would just sit there and go, oh, gosh, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky that I've never experienced domestic violence of any kind. And it wasn't until I started to do a lot of advocacy in that area, and I actually ended up founding Brisbane's first domestic violence memorial, which we dedicated to, you know, the men and the women and the children in our communities who had been lost, and to their families who'd been left behind. And something clicked one day when I was reading something about verbal and mental abuse, and also about gaslighting and sexual abuse. And I finally understood that everything that this particular man had been doing for the 18 months leading up to the sexual assault were forms of domestic violence, because they were physical. I never acknowledged them because he had emotionally and psychologically manipulated me, which is known as gaslighting. I didn't recognise that. You know, he would say things to me like, he would ask me to come into town late at night, and if I turned around and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm really tired, I can't make it in tonight, he would manipulate me, guilt trip me, and say things like, well, you don't make promises and then go back on them. You know, that's not something that you do to someone that you care about. And so he would really manipulate me in ways like that. And even after the sexual assault, he was playing with my mind and saying things like, no, that didn't happen. It didn't happen how you're thinking. No, you can't remember it right, you know. Don't worry about it, everything's fine. And all those things played on my mind. And so it took me 10 years to come to terms with all of those things and begin to work through those memories. And that was when I made a decision and said to my husband, I need to go and get some professional help, because this is spilling over into our marriage and I don't want this to affect us. And so I had to, you know, before that I had only ever really seen 1 or 2 counsellors, and they hadn't been a good fit for me. They kind of scared me off seeing psychologists because the experiences were just so unhelpful and uncaring. But I decided to be brave and look for someone again, and I was fortunate to find a psychologist who was really, really caring and a really beautiful person, and she helped me, and I feel very blessed. I only needed to see her a few times, but she was able to help me work through those memories and do some things that helped me to put all of those memories to rest. Part of that was writing. Writing has always been a huge part of my life. Even when I was living with Dad's abuse as a young girl, I used to sit on my bed and write in my diary every night, and that was my way of processing all of the thoughts that were in my head and getting them out of my head. It's something I've relied on a lot over the years, especially as I still live with anxiety from time to time. I will do a lot of writing or gratitude journaling as a way of working through feelings. So when I saw this psychologist, she got me to do some different exercises, and one of them involved letter writing. So I actually wrote down everything that I would have wanted to say to that guy who had assaulted me, and also everything that I wanted to say to his family, because I'd never told his mum the real reason why I suddenly cut her son out of my life.